ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, yes. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yes, greetings everybody, and thank you, Dr. Yasmin. My name is Bradley Hiller. I'm from Islamic Development Bank. It was nice to hear from Ms. Anud from European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is one of our sister multilateral development banks. So I will have a presentation just for 5 or 10 minutes to give a very brief introduction. For the Islamic Development Bank, we've certainly done more in the yellow economy and green economy than the blue economy. This is an emerging space. But I think as Ms. Anud mentioned, many of the activities that we undertake on the land obviously have impacts ultimately on the ocean. So I'll talk a little bit about some of that and then some of the innovative financing modalities, including Islamic finance, that we can access to support green, blue and yellow economy activities. So just a very brief introduction to the Islamic Development Bank. We're a multilateral development bank. We have our headquarters based in Jeddah. We have 57 member countries across the Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, South Asia, Eastern Europe and South America. All of our financial transactions are in compliance with Islamic law, Sharia compliant. And we have a regional distribution across many of those areas, across multiple sectors as well. Currently, our organisational strategy includes components on driving green economic growth, and this is supported around 2 key pillars, one which is around green, resilient and sustainable infrastructure, and the other around inclusive human capital development. Climate change is a cross-cutting issue for us, and many issues around resilience building and environmental stewardship will remain important for us as we look forward to the next 10 years. I just wanted to mention that we support the SDGs in many of the Rio conventions. People have probably heard of the 3 Rio conventions on nature, climate and desertification. And I think one thing here that's very important is we've seen very strong recent leadership. 3 of the last climate COPs have been in Egypt, United Arab Emirates and Azerbaijan. And the last desertification COP was in Saudi Arabia. And just last month, we saw the IUCN World Conservation Congress also hosted in the UAE. So there's been really strong leadership from the region, which I think is positive. Just looking at some concepts. So as a multilateral development bank, obviously, one of the main areas of business for us is lending and financial support, but we also play an important role around technical assistance, knowledge generation and capacity building. So I just wanted to touch on the concepts of yellow economy and just land transition briefly. So the yellow economy, we know that this is an important part of the MENA region, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to build capacities of people and to fast-track economies. One thing that I just wanted to draw attention to was the Yellow Economy Global Initiative, which is led by the ITC ILO, International Training Centre for the ILO, and this aims to foster job-rich growth and decent work to seize new opportunities in desert economies. And currently we're almost through a 3-part webinar series, which has covered desert agriculture and just land transition, which I'll talk about in a moment, desert tourism and cultural heritage, and water management and renewable energy. So you can see that these relate to many aspects of the economy, but also things linking to the blue economy as well. We've done quite a bit of work in this space. Looking at just land transition, why is this important? And I'll explain what it is. We know that dry lands cover a large part of the global area. They're home to 1/3 of people, but many are already degraded, and this problem is getting worse. In terms of rationale and potential benefits, we know that, for example, women constitute half of agricultural workers globally, but own less than 1/5 of land. And we also know that agriculture employs more than 1/4 of the global workforce, which is far greater than less than 2% for energy. So if we look at a just land transition, many people are probably familiar with a just energy transition where we see communities going from, say, coal-based to renewables. But what would a just land transition look like? And this could be very relevant for many areas in the MENA region. And we know that this is also closely linked to the blue economy as discussed. So we've written some work on this with other colleagues from UN agencies and various other institutions. And we think that the just land transition can be a shift to inclusive economies and societies that are fair, equitable, inclusive and sustainable, that reduce inequalities and poverty, and that uphold the human rights of communities affected by environmental degradation, and to implement response measures needed to address that. So this is something, again, which is tangential to the blue economy, but we think is really critical. Some areas of focus, again, linking to the blue economy, could be around more sustainable cities and urban development, achieving land degradation neutrality, transforming food systems, and enhancing resilience of land and water resources. We wrote a paper for the T20, which is the G20 think tank, around new norms and standards, governance. Here we're focusing on financing, so we're looking at sustainable public and private financing. We're looking at MDB keystone finance mobilisation, and then also potential influence on fiscal policies, subsidies and trade tariffs as well. And then the last component was on social inclusion. We've really started socialising this concept at the COPs, looking at the interface between gender and just transition. We've done work with ILO looking at quantitative modelling of if countries meet their climate targets, how will this create jobs in the economy and how will this reduce jobs? So this covers the green, yellow and blue economies. And also we'll discuss this at Just Land Transition at COP30 coming up in 1 or 2 weeks. Now we shift to green Islamic finance and climate finance. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Islamic Development Bank launched a 500 million euro green sukuk. Green sukuk is the Islamic equivalent of a green bond, and we have a sustainable finance framework, which was updated in July this year, which can help us to issue green sukuk. What green sukuk does is bring in private sector finance for public sector goods opportunities. And you can see some of the areas of potential proceed use here around sustainable water and wastewater management, which Ms. Anud touched on, linking that to the blue economy, but also environmentally sustainable management of natural living resources and also climate change adaptation. So to date, the ISDB has issued almost $6 billion in green and sustainability sukuk, and many more times in conventional sukuk as well. So the green and sustainability side is really starting to scale up. The actual issuance in the London Stock Exchange was 5 times oversubscribed. So this shows that the private sector is interested to become involved in some of these activities. We're also working with various partners on enhancing Islamic banking for climate action. We're working with the UNDP, I understand some colleagues are there in the room, on Takaful, which is Islamic insurance, and building the financial resilience of vulnerable stakeholders to climate and non-climate related shocks. And we're also launching a report on Islamic climate finance at COP30 around various types of Islamic modalities which can be used to enhance climate support as well, which is linked to blue, yellow and green economies. We also work with external sources such as the Green Climate Fund and others to help build resilience as well as mobilise bilateral funding as well. In the region, we work very closely with the Arab Coordination Group, which colleagues may be familiar with. So we've had many different pledges recently at the COPs, the most recent being at COP16 to combat desertification and land degradation. And we know Ag Fund, which is a major organiser of this conference, is a major player in that as well. Just the last couple of slides on nature finance and upcoming initiatives. The multilateral development banks work very closely as a community or a network. So we issued a joint statement on nature, people and planet. We've also developed common principles for tracking nature positive finance, which includes many activities around the blue economy. At COP30, we'll be launching nature finance methodology. And at ISDB, we'll also be launching a joint knowledge product with UN Habitat on nature-based solutions in the Arab region, which again is very much linked to these ideas. And one thing I think is that we have very well-established climate finance methodology. And just in September this year, we announced that MDBs jointly supported $137 billion in climate finance. So if the methodologies and the principles and some of the statements that we're making for nature can help form the foundation, perhaps in 5 or 10 years' time, we can also be reporting potentially on nature finance numbers as well. My last slide, there's some big upcoming initiatives at the interface of green, yellow and blue economies in the region. Middle East Green Initiative is proposed to be the world's largest landscape restoration scheme, sequestering a significant potential of global greenhouse gas emissions. And there's also various other things around water resilience and also the COPs will help continue some of this momentum. So I think it's a really important and interesting time for the region. And I think there's lots of opportunities to help take this forward in terms of the green, yellow and blue economy.
Mr. Bradley, you had a comment, if you want to go for it.
Hey, sorry, colleagues. Apologies for not being able to be there in person. That's the first point. We have some of these challenges. Just a couple of points I wanted to make there in terms of innovative financing, some tangible examples. So the Islamic Development Bank has something called the Lives and Livelihoods Fund. What this does is this links between philanthropic finance with multilateral development bank concessional lending. And what this enables us to do is to reach, in this case, the poorest communities, because we blend grant financing at scale with concessional lending from the multilateral development banks. So there is a possibility that a similar concept to this could be used for the blue economy, for example. This is one idea. Another one is we have a scheme called Tadamon, which looks at supporting civil society organizations through crowdfunding. So again, this is a different and innovative model. I mentioned Sukuk. Sukuk is very good because what this does is it crowds in private sector financing for public sector activities. And so this is a very effective mechanism. As I mentioned, we issued one just recently and was 5 times oversubscribed. And what this means is that there's really strong demand from the private sector to become involved in these activities. So these are some really tangible examples. The other thing I mentioned was the Middle East Green Initiative. Now, why do I mention this? This is a case where when it was launched, there was a commitment of up to $2.5 billion US of grant financing to be mixed or blended with concessional lending to support activities across the region. This Middle East Green Initiative focuses mostly on the land and greening activities, but I understand that it has got partnerships with the Global Ocean Alliance because we know that what happens on the land can influence the ocean environment. One other thing to mention is that in Asia Pacific, they had a program called Ridge to Reef. I'm not sure if people have talked about this in the last couple of days, but the idea here is it's a little bit like watershed management, is that what happens up on the ridge in the Pacific on the islands influences what happens on the reef in terms of pollution down the rivers, in terms of sediment being discharged in the coastal communities, in terms of stability and climate resilience. So again, there's different models that could be looked at in terms of framing, but then in terms of financing, which could really benefit the region as well. So I'm happy to discuss this with colleagues afterwards if it's helpful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brad.